Hi there, I welcome you back to this tutorial. In this tutorial, I will talk about GIS data. If you have not watched the previous video, I encourage you to watch it because it will keep your mind in perspective and you'll be able to understand how we are building our story. However, if you only want to read about or if you only want to learn about what GIS data is, then you can start from here. In our day-to-day life, we have we have come across several transformations in society. We have lived to see information collected by writing it on paper with a pen. We have seen printed forms that we fill at the airport, filling your immigration form or filling any form at the airport, in the school, filling forms in the hospital, filling forms um, when you are registering for to sign up to a gym. We fill form almost everywhere. Now we have gotten to a point where we can easily fill forms on our mobile phones or fill forms even over the internet. Now these forms is basically on informations gathered relating to a particular activity, which I will call event. Now someone ends up entering all the manual informations that are on paper forms into a computer in a form of a table like the one we have in the Excel. Now, these informations that we have in the Excel is information about an event at a place at a particular time, or it could be information about an event at a place over a period of time. Regardless of this, we try to make sense out of this data. We do so many things. We clean the data, we remove duplicates, and we try to visualize the data to give us some sort of understanding. We end up having visualizations like this, where we try to understand what is going on, how much more was one over the other, and how does one relate to the other. We've done so many form of visualization, but in a typical meeting, let's have an example. You are in a health meeting where you discuss health matters. In these meetings, several questions going to come up. The question of why, the who, the where, the how, the when, and the what that happen is what is going to be discussed at this meeting. This, from my previous video, I will still call it like this is a by the fireside discussion, just like what was happening in the Stone Age. After this meeting, there's going to be a conclusion, and these conclusions are supposed to be actionable goals that would lead this group to achieve their objective. Now, after this meeting, let's assume that these are the conclusions that happened or that was agreed on in this meeting. The first, that they have all come to agree that there is a COVID-19 outbreak. They've all come to realize that it entered the country about 2 weeks ago, and they have come to understand that it can only be spread from one person to another through contact. And what they have decided to do is to control the spread by quarantining people who have been exposed. Now, these are very nice and conclusive decisions, and these are very good decisions that could help solve the problem. But the question is, what next? Where do they start from? How do they find the people who were exposed? How do they find the places that they can quarantine the people? This is an example one. Let's look at a second example. Let's imagine that the meeting is also about a startup company who is trying to grow and look at how they can improve as a company. In these meetings, they've asked all the why, the who, the where, the what's. They've done all those questions and they've come to a conclusion that they need to build a new factory to supplement the existing one. They also need to make sure that the factory is built at a place where there is already existing plant. Because it's a startup, probably they don't have money to build their own plant. So they want it to be closer to a place where there is already a plant so they can leverage on those plants. They want the factory to be at a place where they can also find the agricultural materials they need to be able to keep the factory running. And they want this factory to also at the same time be closer to their distribution centers. There are so many things that might have gone on to get bring about this discussion. But again, the question is what next? In this discussion and conclusions that has been made, the question now is where do we find places where there are already existing plants? Where do we find places where there are enough agricultural materials that can supplement or that can feed the factory what it needs? And how do we find or how do we get to know all our distribution centers and make a decision to ensure that the factory is actually close? By what we mean by close, they will have to still define that, but probably it will end up being in a distance form. How do we make sure this happens? This is the only question that can bring change to all the discussions that went on in this meeting. Example number three. Let's imagine that it was a bank having a meeting. The bank has asked all the questions that they need to ask. At the end of the day, the bank has decided that we need to open new branches. We need to give more loans to people, and the loan should not be less than maybe 1 million Ghana cedis. We need to find new customers who would be able to deposit a minimum of 100,000 Ghana cedis. That is the only way we can keep ourselves in business. That's the only way we can keep running as a bank, and that's the only way we can actually grow as a bank. These are very wonderful decisions. Again, what next? From this meeting, where do we find a place where we would be able to find people who need loan as much as 1 million Ghana cedis? Where do we find where do we find places where our potential customers have the ability and the capital, or they have dispensable income of 100,000 cedis or more to be able to deposit into a bank? Without the decision or without the answers to the question where, which I have just mentioned over the three scenarios that I have given you, there cannot be any action taken. Everything that was discussed in this meeting cannot be implemented effectively, if not at all. And so the question becomes very important. But the data that we have seen, the Excel sheet that I showed earlier on, cannot give us answers to this question because it doesn't have information concerning the where. Even if you will look at if you look at the data, it has information about a country. But if you go into the country, where do you start from? And that's basically what we mean by GIS data. The difference between the data we already have and we already use and GIS data is the missing of the location information. Now, GIS data is the information that is tied to the location or the areas the information comes from. Imagine that all the scenarios we've mentioned, the information that the people in the meeting had were actually in a form of locations like this, where they could see all their distribution centers. For instance, the startup company can see all their distribution centers. They can actually identify all the places where their agricultural products they are interested in can be found, or places even where the places where you can actually find your new customers, for instance, in the instance of the bank, places where they can find their new customers. If this data was available, it would have made all the difference. They will leave the meeting with more confidence, and they will leave the meeting with answers of where they are going next. In all the things that we have discussed, without the location data, there would be another meeting again, and they will waste their time again to still discuss matters which they might not have answers to. And they will end up making decisions based on several factors aside data. Decisions will be made based on availability, based on the limited information that they receive, but it would not be based on data. And if things ends up, paperwork gets separated or get being different from what is really being done on the ground. And that is what we talk about as GIS data. In my next tutorial, in my next video, I am going to explain to you the types of GIS data, the GIS data models, and how the data is captured, how this data is used, or how we integrate it into the already existing data set that we have to ensure that we do have a data that answers our specific questions. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.